Part 3, Freedom of Choice. Chapter 8. You would think this would be enough. Traditional arguments against marijuana prohibition. Beginning in the late 1960s, a handful of loosely organized advocacy groups began to publicly advance the cause of reforming America's criminal marijuana laws. The most prominent of these groups was NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, which formed in 1970. NORML, along with a small coalition of doctors and lawyers, started lobbying state politicians and the public regarding the need to cease arresting adults who were using marijuana responsibly in the privacy of their own home. NORML's arguments, which typically hinged on the notion that America's overly punitive pot policies were more detrimental to both the user and to society than was the use of marijuana itself, were persuasive in convincing states to make incremental changes to their marijuana prohibition laws. Between 1970 and 1979, most state legislatures reduced their marijuana possession penalties from felonies to misdemeanors. 11 states took steps to decriminalize minor marijuana possession offenses, a policy that was initially recommended by the National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse in 1972. Under these laws, states replaced criminal penalties for minor pot offenses with fine-only sanctions and removed the possibility that offenders would be sentenced to prison. Yet by the 1980s, public and political opinion became less tolerant of liberalizing America's marijuana laws. So-called parent groups, led predominantly by suburban mothers warning of the dangers, both real and more often than not imaginary, pot posed to children, began dominating the public and political discourse. As a result, state and federal politicians ceased entertaining efforts to reduce marijuana penalties, and public support for cannabis legalization dwindled to less than 20%. However, by the mid-1990s, several new nonprofit organizations, such as the Marijuana Policy Project and the Drug Policy Alliance, arrived on the scene to assist NORML with its multi-decade reform efforts. All of these organizations seek to advance their cause by highlighting the futility of prohibition and by emphasizing the multitude of adverse and unintended consequences that this policy imposes upon the general public. In short, reformers maintain that modern marijuana prohibition is a cure that is far worse than the disease. As in the 70s, this line of argument has again proven effective at influencing politicians to undertake incremental reforms. Since 1996, more than a dozen states have enacted legal exemptions to allow for qualified patients to use cannabis, and 2 additional states have decriminalized the drug's use for all adults. Even more importantly, nationwide, public support for legalizing the sale and use of marijuana by those aged 21 or older has steadily risen over the past 2 decades to over 40%. In fact, polling data released in early 2009 showed that a far greater percentage of Americans endorsed legalizing pot than supported the Republican Party. Obviously, public opinion is heading in the right direction, even if overall support remains shy of a solid majority. So let's explore some of the most common and intellectually compelling arguments advanced by reform organizations in support of ending cannabis prohibition. In the remainder of this chapter, we'll focus on 7 of these arguments.